A lot of founders don't think marketing is their responsibility. And that's a piece of advice I find myself having to give a lot. They say, I'm going to hire a director of marketing and I'm going to hand this off. No, you're not. This is your responsibility. And this person is going to help usher you through this process and own a lot of the messaging and train you and do a lot of wonderful things. But ultimately, the founder has to be the voice of this effort. I sometimes have founders go, well, oh, I've got this person who's better at it than me, or, "Oh, excuse, excuse, excuse." It's sort of like you have to do it. It has to be you. And I think if you're inherently uncomfortable with that, you have to do whatever it takes to get comfortable. And I think the other misnomer is people think it's about stealing the spotlight and sort of, well, I want to share credit. I would argue you're actually not doing your company a favor by taking that approach. You should be out there advocating for the company at every turn. And I think your people will thank you for it because a lot of big opportunities aren't open to someone who's a VP of XYZ. They're open to a CEO. And so you've got to smoke them if you've got them, so to speak.
Welcome to another episode of Supra Insider. This time, Marc and I sat down with Allison Braley, who is a partner and the head of marketing at Bain Capital Ventures. Allison and I worked together at a company called Canvas a few years back in San Francisco, and we were very close partners on the product and marketing side, and we've stayed in touch ever since. Allison has since made the transition from the operating side to the venture side, and before I even met Allison, she had executive leadership roles at Zeusk, ZocDoc, The Information, and a couple other really impressive companies.
Yeah, this was a really fun conversation. And we got to go deep on what founders get wrong when it comes to marketing, the importance of working on your company narrative, and all the positive side effects of the exercise, the importance of establishing an authentic online voice as a founder, and her shade on ghostwriting. We also talked about how to set up a productive partnership between product leaders and marketers. And we finished by discussing her experience transitioning from being an operator to becoming a venture partner and investor. We think you're going to particularly enjoy this episode if you're trying to get better at working with your marketing counterpart. There's going to be a lot of tactical tips. So take a listen and let us know what you think.
All right. Welcome to the show, Allison.
Thanks so much for having me, Ben and Marc.
Yeah, you've been someone I've been wanting to have on for a while. I remember we used to have such interesting and fun conversations working together at Canvas, and
Sure did.
we haven't yet had a marketing person on the podcast yet. So we've been wanting to expand, and you're the first person that came to mind. So I'm really happy you joined
Hopefully
us.
I can represent my community well.
So
Sure you will.
we wanted to start with a fun warm-up question, which is, I want to hear about your Succession posts. What were these posts that you were writing? They were blowing up before Succession ended as a show. Like, why did you start them? And then were you surprised at all with the way that these posts have resonated with people?
So I guess I have a beef with the way the media portrays marketing and communications people, particularly communications people so often. I feel like it's reduced to like someone screaming no comment into an open mic, like running through the streets, or some Hollywood party girl kind of image that I think is really detrimental to the kinds of strategic work that people do in this field. And so Succession excited me because I felt like at its core, it's a bunch of corporate intrigue, obviously, and huge family dynamic challenges. But underneath that, there was a lot of communications content that actually showed some respect for the industry that we're in and the impact that announcements and the way that you say things can have on the company's stock price or who ultimately succeeds as the next leader. And as a result of that, I felt excited about that and wanted to write about it. So I wrote what I thought was like a one-off post, I think, and people thought it was funny. So I kept going with it. So much thought leadership content, particularly on LinkedIn, is so dry and predictable and formulaic. It's like, I had this experience, this is what I learned, or something schlocky a little bit about like family and, people dragging stuff into it just for attention. And I think ultimately these posts ended up getting more attention because they were just something different too. It was like, wow, somebody's recapping pop culture on LinkedIn. Tell me more about that. So yeah, those were fun to write. And I'm a super fan of the show. The writing is just so crisp. Did you guys watch Succession?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a fan.
Who's the product guy on there? Would it be Mattson?
I think in his manic episodes, Kendall would probably consider himself a
Exactly.
product guy.
For sure. For sure.
The tech entrepreneur. What was his name? Madsen, the guy that runs Go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mattson. Yeah, wasn't that? That's me. Something.
He's like an Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg crazy guy.
Yeah.
But man, talk about the disadvantaged PR team that he had, or his marketing person was just getting dragged through the mud with all kinds of inappropriate stuff. So
She
hopefully
was
that's
at
just
that.
fiction.
Carol was the one I really liked who worked for Waystar.
Hugo was
People,
the other one. Hugo seemed to be just like the guy that's going to go down with the ship.
yeah, that dude was very ambitious underneath it all.
Were you surprised at all with the way that your posts were received? And do you feel like it had an unexpected positive benefit on your reputation as just like a marketing person?
For sure. I mean, I had been trying to do more content, mainly to dog food it in a way, because a lot of my job is advising founders and investors on how to build up their own presence. And sometimes people would, not this impolitely, but more or less say to me, "What do you know about it? You don't know how much time it takes or how long it will take to build a following. So why should I listen to you?" And so I ultimately felt like it was my responsibility and sort of incumbent on me then to try to do more of that. And I think it could only have benefit for the places that I've worked in that hopefully I get more attention, the company gets more attention, et cetera. So I started doing that. And let's be honest, the first few posts I did were like crickets and tumbleweeds. Nobody is listening to this, nobody's reading it. And so as part of that, I got better at figuring out how to write a post that would be consumed well, the types of topics that people were interested in. And I have a friend, Justin Welsh, from an old job at ZocDoc, who's the third most popular person on
Yeah, he's
LinkedIn.
amazing.
I think it's crazy. And so he gave me some advice too, early days on it. And I've listened to some of his courses and things. He's great. But there's just like some good tips and tricks you could use too around the first line before you hit the more button is everything. The
Mm.
very beginning of your post. And so you don't want to be clickbaity, but you also don't want to just launch into some long diatribe that people don't know if they want to follow.
I'm curious to get your thoughts because I started to pay a lot more attention to marketing and distribution after I started the community as I wanted to grow it. And part of me, to be honest, wishes that I had started to think about it earlier. I've learned those skills since they're incredibly valuable. But something that I've noticed in the last 2 years, maybe, or 3 years, there's a lot more emphasis for founders to build their personal brand. And I'm trying to do that. I've been trying to grow my following on LinkedIn. And a question that I keep asking myself is it the best use of my time? And could I be spending my time somewhere else that could be yielding better ROI? How do you think about that?
It's not dissimilar to how I think about marketing in a way. So there's a nice dovetail here. I feel like you should be spending the majority of your time on your core job at any given time, but you should always carve out some time for experimentation. And provided you time box it, how hard could it be? And so I actually ended up time boxing 1 hour every Sunday night, which is part of the impetus for the Succession posts. I had just watched Succession when I kicked into writing my post, and I was like, that was so comsy. I've got to write about it. But as long as you can carve out a set amount of time and commit to that, I find that's the advice I give execs a lot who are like, I don't have time to do this in a meaningful way. I think particularly LinkedIn, you can do in that manner. And then again, like with Twitter, if you really want to get into X, carving out 15 minutes a day or something to react and respond to posts in addition to creating content makes a huge difference. So that's the advice I usually give. And do weird things too. Like if you want to write about a TV show, if you have a really different idea that's unique, play with it and be consistent is the other thing I learned from it. I try to post at least once a week, preferably twice, depending on my workload. And getting out of that pattern, it seems to reduce people's desire to interact and engage with you. If they're looking forward to hearing from you every week, it gives them a reason to check back and follow you. Have you guys found that with the podcast, for example, like a consistent schedule makes a big difference?
Yeah, I would say there's two things that we are optimizing for. One is the sense of engagement and fun that we have recording. And I'd say the second thing is consistency of publishing. And I
Yeah.
think we feel like if we can be consistent with publishing, that'll give us the reps to, I think, get better at it. And as long as we have a North Star metric for all the tweaks that we're making, which is like, how does it feel to do the pod? Are we enjoying it more every episode? Are we getting better at this every episode? That's what's worked. But what would you add anything to that, Mark?
Yeah, I think podcasting is a little bit unique because I feel like the shelf space for podcasts is so limited. So I think there's one about consistency, but there's also one about being predictable of when we're going to release. So then we become part of people's habits. So like if maybe they're commuting on Tuesday, they know that, hey, our episode is coming on Monday night. So then they can download it and they can listen to their commute on Tuesday. So yeah, I think that's the other part I'm thinking about. It was just like not only posting every week, but being very consistent about the exact time that we post so people
Yeah.
can.
I do think there's value in that for sure. And what do you guys think about how do you think about guests? Yeah, obviously, I'm sure you've had a lot of product leaders on, but now you're having a weirdo like me on to talk about marketing. How do you think about curating content for your audience?
Our North Star again is making sure that we have fun and that we have really interesting conversations. So we try to have guests that probably have something to say that we're interested to going deep with them. And of course, we're both product guys. So, something that it's connected to products, either product leaders or founders is another big one. I think we both really enjoy working with founders, but also guests that work very closely with products. So maybe it's engineers, maybe it's designers, maybe it's marketing.
The podcasts I listen to, I totally agree. The vibe matters. Like these people have a banter and a discourse, and it's a good time to listen to. Is as much value to me as the content itself.
Yeah.
For sure.
One beef I have with podcasts that there's some podcasts that are so efficiency based where they cut all the pauses and then it almost sounds like you're listening to a conversation on steroids. And I feel like those are less enjoyable for me because what I like with long form podcasts is if someone asks a question and the other person actually has to take a second and think, you hear the thinking pause. And when they speak, it's almost like it carries more weight for me because I like that I got the full feel for them thinking. And there's
That's
something about
interesting.
that.
It's the patter of it that matters too. I give people that advice a lot on writing. So many people are addicted to writing in these really long, formal sentences when they write, and that's not at all how we speak. And so you should always vary your sentence length, cadence in your writing as much as you would with your speaking to avoid sounding stilted. But I agree, it's the same. Even when you're listening to it, you feel like you're reading it, and then you're like, "Why am I even listening to this? I could just read it."
Yeah. So that's an interesting kind of segue because as we think about writing, I'm just curious, do you think that writing publicly, like the advice when you give founders about putting themselves out there, is getting better at writing both publicly and internally, like one of the things you spend time working with them on?
For sure. I mean, the core thing I start out working with people on is the idea. And so I do these products here now. I have a product internally. I'm increasingly looking at publishing more content around it, but it's called a narrative workshop. And so typically early stage founders, but I've done a couple of growth stage folks who were like looking to pivot the company. I'll bring the founders together and we'll have a really, and I warn them about this, a weird conversation for about 90 minutes. People in founding roles I find are so accustomed to worrying about the day to day and what's getting done and how much money's in the bank and what's our product roadmap that I like to take a step back and ask questions like the question I always open with is, you're at IHOP with your grandmother. How do you explain this company to her? Because I want to get people out of the weeds of what the technology is and into the bigger picture of what does this do? What's the big vision here? Another question I ask a lot is, if you've succeeded in 10 years, how will the world be different? And that doesn't
Mm,
have to be grandiose. It can be specific to the industry that you're serving. It can be insurance companies will have greater loyalty among customers and because they have this product. But I'm interested in hearing the bigger picture story. What's unique about these I find is I get asked for the transcript of these or the recording more often than not. Because I think founders are saying to me afterward, I didn't realize my co-founder and I weren't on the same page about this. Or I thought the way my co-founder said this, she was really right and really interesting. And that's something I want to implement in the way I talk about the company. And so it's a great alignment building exercise in addition to being something that serves the marketing goals. And marketing to me is not just external, it's internal as well. So you mentioned, Ben, you mentioned writing for internal and external. I think that's all part of the same whole. But the writing has to ladder up to this master messaging and positioning doc that takes into account who do we want to be when we grow up? What are our tenets? How do we prove that those tenets are true? What's our brand voice and tone? What does our competition look like and how do they sound? And then how do we slot into the conversations that are already happening out in the world? So that's the kind of product that I've built here. We run it over a 2-week session for founders. I've gotten really good feedback, not just in terms of marketing, but also in terms of like, geez, this feels like something I can use for recruiting to get people excited about working here. And I mean, have you guys found that when you go to, I found this a lot when I go to early stage startups, people aren't on the same page a lot about what we're building and doing at a leadership level. And there isn't this sort of big rallying cry that gets people excited to build. And that's something I love working with folks on, but I'm curious if that's a challenge you've seen as well.
for sure. I think when interviewing, especially at early stage companies, one of the things that I love doing is just doing a bunch of backdoor references on different people in the company or even talking to different executives. And when the messaging or what they're trying to accomplish is very different from a couple of key people in the company, it's a clear red flag for me that
Yeah.
maybe there's some foundational conversations or alignment that have yet to be figured out and adds another element of risk into the conversation that factors my decision. So 100%. So I
Yeah.
think the hiring part of it is a side effect, but I think a really important one.
Yeah,
I
it's
think
huge.
another pitfall that I see some folks take in the early stages, they will just take the exact story that they used to maybe raise their seed round or whatever the last round of funding was and repeat it verbatim to the people that are on their team inside. And I find that doesn't really work well in my view because the investors that are funding this long-term vision and story are just looking for different types of things than the people who are actually going to be responsible for implementing it and the level of like clarity that they need. So I generally like to tell early stage founders that I work with that it's good to obviously have overlap between the stories that you're telling, and they should be pointing in the same North Star direction, but the level of clarity and definition and texture that these stories have should be catered to the different audiences.
Absolutely. And I think like a good founder knows at an audience level which of these brand tenets really matters to which audience and how am I telling the story. But one thing I feel like I often work with founders on too is when you announce a company's funding or you de-stealth, you shouldn't just rely on what's out there in the media. You need to do a first person voice blog post, I always advise, and put that on social because I think that's what attracts people to join a leader is hearing from them in their own words what they're trying to do. And it gives them some humanity and depth that you can't really get from more corporate kind of approaches.
Why do you think that the blog post is the best medium to use for
Any
that?
blog post, it can be a LinkedIn, it can be a tweet. I do think that it should live on your blog because that's where prospective candidates are going to learn about the company. And for whatever you put on your about page, let's face it, a lot of that content sounds the same. Where I always want to navigate is who is this person I'm working for and what is motivating them to get up in the morning? What are they trying to build? What can I glean from the way they're talking about how they think about team? And that just makes a huge difference, I think. And so I view it as another touch point in the conversion funnel to getting people to apply and or accept.
Is this one of the pieces of advice you find yourself repeating most to founders is just being like more publicly authentic and just telling them their story more publicly in first person?
That's definitely a big piece of it. The other thing I talk to people a lot about now, and I'm curious to get your take on, is there's this huge movement around going direct
Hmm.
and skipping all sort of filtered conversations in favor of just putting your voice out there. And my take on this has been unless you have a built-in audience, people will come to me and go, Elon Musk says going direct is the future. I'm going to go direct. And I'm like, to who? You have 60 followers on X. How is that going to work? And I also don't think, to a lot of people's point who advocate for this, that going pure media is the way to go anymore either. Let's face it, the media's audience is diminishing and dwindling. Reporters are getting laid off right and left. I mean, the media business model is broken. So I think there has to be a hybrid approach. And I view it now more and more as like a flywheel of, you have to put your voice out there. You have to get on stage speaking ops. You should do podcasts. You should do long tail stuff as well. And you should do media relations. Like you need to do all of it now, where say 5 years ago, those were viewed as separate work streams, if that makes sense. I think they all ladder up to each other now. And so that's advice I find myself giving a lot, particularly in the last few months, is it's not a binary approach where you're going to do media or you're going to go direct. That's like that's a false dichotomy. There's not two options. There's many. There's a lot of flavors. So that's one definite piece of the founder advice. Do you guys find that founders are clamoring for that more like, no, I'll do it myself. I'll build it myself.
I think it's really uncomfortable for some founders. If I think about the people who I think should be out there telling their stories and are not doing it, and they're not public, they think maybe there's like more important work to do quietly behind the scenes. I'm just going to put my heads down and I'm going to build, and I can delegate this when I'm ready to drive traffic. I see that. And as a person who obviously myself is comfortable enough doing this podcast and posting on LinkedIn, I have empathy for those people, but at the same time, I don't think I'm built in the exact same way as them. And I think you could teach people to get more comfortable with it, but I don't think every founder has embraced the potential impact and the value of getting the reps in as much as maybe they should. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. A big trend that I've noticed is that there's a big expectation mismatch of how fast you can build an audience. And I've definitely talked to founders that were like, hey, I've been posting consistently for 3 months and I've only gotten like 500 followers. And I'm like, yeah, it takes So some of these people, like Justin Welsh, like you mentioned, they've spent
Years.
maybe 5, 6, 7 years, and they were early too. Like they also had that. And I mean, now there's way more people posting. There's less attention to grab. And I think the other trend that I'm noticing, a lot of these founders now are using ghostwriters. And I think some of them are really good, some of them are really bad. And you can just tell right away there's no personality to this content. I can already tell which company you're using by who's engaging with your content, like the format, the videos that you're posting. So I don't know, maybe will pay off in the long term, but I feel like I read your content. I'm like, who are you? What makes you unique? Why should I care? I don't know.
A lot of founders don't think marketing is their responsibility. And that's a piece of advice I find myself having to give a lot. They say, I'm going to hire a director of marketing and I'm going to hand this off. No, you're not. This is your responsibility. And this person is going to help usher you through this process and own a lot of the messaging and train you and do a lot of wonderful things. But ultimately, the founder has to be the voice of this effort. I sometimes have founders go, well, oh, I've got this person who's better at it than me, or, "Oh, excuse, excuse, excuse." It's sort of like you have to do it. It has to be you. And I think if you're inherently uncomfortable with that, you have to do whatever it takes to get comfortable. And I think the other misnomer is people think it's about stealing the spotlight and sort of, well, I want to share credit. I would argue you're actually not doing your company a favor by taking that approach. You should be out there advocating for the company at every turn. And I think your people will thank you for it because a lot of big opportunities aren't open to someone who's a VP of XYZ. They're open to a CEO. And so you've got to smoke them if you've got them, so to speak.
We've had a similar conversation in multiple episodes of the podcast about founders delegating key product responsibilities early on when they should be owning them themselves. And Josh Herzig Marks came on he's on a Supra member of the community. And his view is that sometimes like founders will just avoid doing the uncomfortable things. And if doing the uncomfortable thing for some founders is marketing, then they're going to try to take it off their plate. It's not always the right thing to take off uncomfortable things off your plate. There's a reason there's like hard things.
If
Founder.
you're bad at it, you'll never be excellent, but you could at least be good,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I really admire my friend Mylene Megalinden runs comms for NVIDIA. And I really admire, for example, what she's done for Jensen in the last 6 months or so. He went from someone who's pretty introverted and not out there a lot to being like a superstar. He's like signing people's bodies at events. And I think that was very thoughtfully done. And he's armed with great messaging and he still can be himself. He's never going to be Steve Ballmer, but he's out there doing his thing and people are loving it. He has great, unique perspectives.
Oh, was she the mind behind the tattoo on the leather jacket?
He was rolling the leather jacket game long before her. But I guess great marketing and comms helps a founder be more themselves and more authentic. It doesn't change you into somebody else. That's why I don't like some of that ghostwriting stuff. Is if you're not capturing the person's authentic voice, it's never going to resonate. Look, if you're someone who hates to write and you want a ghostwriter to do a first pass for you that you go in and edit and add your voice over into, fantastic. Not everyone can create from scratch, but if you're just outsourcing that to somebody, I think that's a huge mistake.
And I might be heavily biased here, but maybe an observation from my circle is that there's not a lot of founders that have a marketing background, or maybe there's not as
Rare,
many as like
super rare.
product engineering, maybe in like for like B2B enterprise, maybe like sales. So how do you reconcile that part with like, hey, focus on double down on your strengths and what you're really good at? Because maybe none of the funders have ever done marketing. So then the question is, if you're in that camp, how do you figure out how to do marketing and get good at it?
Yeah. I mean, marketing is a big discipline, right? I think if you think about marketing, it's like a symphony, I sometimes say. You don't want a bunch of the same type of people. It's not a clone army. You need drums, you need horns, you need all kinds of different types of people to make a great marketing organization. And a lot of marketers are either really data led, growth marketers kind of folks, or you have the more brand led, writer, creative kind of archetype. I'm certainly in the second camp, though I know enough to be dangerous about the first camp and manage those folks. And so founders are the same way, right? Like I often find a founder more often is going to be in that first camp and is going to say, I understand growth marketing or I'm doing PLG or whatever. And this is what I understand. So I'm going to just avoid the thing that I don't understand. And again, I think that's a mistake. I think you need to find a way to live authentically in a public space in order to be a founder. And if that's spending time around your people and doing talks at a bunch of data conferences. If you're a prolific writer and you want to write on LinkedIn, if you want to host a podcast, and therefore you just ask the questions then and get to know these industry luminaries around you. It's figuring out what is this person's native tongue? What is their preferred mode of communication? What is their audience, their people, and how do we build a platform around that supports the company? But I
Uh,
think
uh,
skipping that entirely, to your point around time to grow it, is a mistake. By the time you need it, then it's 2 years out, having built that muscle. And you're going, shoot, I really want to be acquired, or shoot, I can't hire people fast enough. And I don't have the mechanism to get my voice out there.
so for that example, let's say I'm a founder who's very good at growth marketing, performance marketing, PLG, and I want to get better at that brand narrative, etc. It sounds like I need a guide or someone to hold my
Yeah.
hand to figure out how to find my voice. Who is that person? Is that the first marketing hire? Is that a
Sometimes
fractional person?
more often than not, I find people hire a growth marketer first, and that makes sense. You need to grow in order to have a company. You should do that. First marketing hire should be like a director of performance marketing or growth or whatever you want to call it, director of marketing, but they're going to be more in that analytical camp. I often find then as founders are heading into like a series B, they're going, shoot, I really need better storytelling. I need people to know about this company more. We're growing at a respectable rate, but we need to get our name out there in a much deeper way. You feel that in a bunch of places then on the growth side as well, once you've done that correctly. I think it can be an in-house hire. If that's something you want to spend a lot of time on, it can be an agency partner. Though I think a lot of agencies fail because they don't have access to the internal narrative. And so I'm a big fan of like get a freelancer and make them feel like they're a part of your company. Invite them to the all hands, invite them to the planning meetings, invite them because that's where they get the context in order to tell a great story. If you just do a call with them once a week and they tell you who they reached out to, that's a waste of everyone's time. And so I'm a fan though of finding somebody who you vibe with deeply. This is almost like if you're Don Corleone, this is your consigliere. This is a person who you should be able to call and say, hey, people are not understanding me on this. What do I do? Or we're not breaking through. I need the external market to know that we have this product, or we're doing this painful pivot. What do I do? This is a person who you're really calling and they're helping you shape your message and get it out to the world. So it's really important to feel like you have trust and understanding with this person.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm thinking about how in that journey to finding product market fit and scaling, there's a lot of probably experimentation that has to happen around the messaging and the positioning. And I'm just curious, the kind of founders that you work with, how often do you recommend they take a fresh look at the way they tell their story and like front load, here's what we're going to do. And then 6 months go by, just execute with that in mind and then come back to it 6 months later and see if anything's changed? Or is this like an always on, always update kind of situation?
Well, there are levels to it, right? So there's a reason the doc I give people is a Google Doc. I'd call it a living doc, and it's something you should constantly be updating parts of it. Now, should you be constantly updating the top level core message? No. And if you do that, everyone's going to have whiplash, both externally and internally. The three tenets about how you're going to be different at solving this core message, those probably shouldn't change a ton either, maybe at most every couple of years. But when you get down into the Q&A section of it and the how we fit into the world section of it, that can really change and can change often. I encourage people after every conversation they have that's sort of introductory about the company, whether that's with a customer or with a potential employee or with the press, go back and look at that Q&A. And if there's new questions that are coming up that you didn't have good answers to, let's add that in there and really think about it. Obviously, the world around you changes. If a new entrant comes in and is trying to eat your lunch in a particular area, let's revisit this messaging and see how we can position against them better to win more. But I almost think of it as like gears, like there's gears on this machine that turn very slowly, and then there's gears that need to turn a lot faster and change more rapidly. How do you guys find that you're feeling like the messaging is lagging the product a bit at points or vice versa? Like the messaging's ahead of where the product is?
Yeah, I feel like for a lot of companies that I work for, the messaging has always been a afterthought. Like we first do the customer research, then we identify the problem, we start to think about solutions, and then once we already started building the solution, that's when we maybe start to loop in more seriously the PMM. And I think that's probably a mistake. Thinking back at the best partnerships that I've had with marketing, I've gotten a lot more out of it when I've looped them in in the beginning.
Road mapping stage, like you're building your roadmap. I don't see why you wouldn't if you have a
And you were
dedicated.
always really good about that when we worked together. I felt like I knew what you were building and why, which made such a difference.
When you came in, I felt like there was someone who's opinionated that I could rely on. I didn't necessarily agree with you on every single thing, and that's never the expectation. But like I knew I could rely on you to have a really strong perspective on what you think would move the needle for the business the most. And then if I could move chips around on the table to make space for those things, like that was
Yeah.
what I wanted to do. So then when we were ready, I remember we were like, we need a promo code system or like a referral code engine. I was like, why is that so important? You explained it to me. Like, there's gonna be some things that are just like really hard for us to do unless we have that. And I was like, let's do it. It makes sense. And that was a big investment that we made. And I think that because you and I were on the same page, if there was any skepticism from anyone else on the team, we could provide a united front and say, based on everything we've talked about, we think this one has the highest chance of moving the needle. So
Yeah, totally. And also, like, nothing worse than coming in at the last minute and being handed something with wild expectations mismatched. I've definitely been in situations, and I won't name company names, but when I was on the agency side, pretty big company, very well-known company now, early days, and you go in and they're like, "We're launching this, like, game-changing update in 2 weeks, and we want to be on the Today Show and in Fortune." And you're like, "That's the thing in that timeline." And I have no idea why you built this or why it's important or anything. And having a delegate from my team be present for some of those conversations would have made a huge difference in just speeding the education process and buy-in for sure. And companies that work like that, I think, get worse results than companies where there's just broader alignment, knowing that you can't invite everybody to every meeting because then it will be a clusterfuck and you'll get nothing done.
yeah. So given our audience, we told you in the beginning, like our audience is product leaders, people working very closely with at least one senior product leader like yourself, but maybe some also folks on the ground. Just in your career, is there anything that you wish the product leaders that you worked with knew or appreciated about marketing that would set them up better for more successful relationships with their marketing counterparts?
There's this sense that marketers are relationship driven people, particularly in my profession, where it's like you'll just make a call and it will get done. And it undervalues, I think, the strategic part of the role, which is around shaping the narrative. And look, depending on the type of marketing person you're working with, they may not care. But I find most of the marketing people I talk to resent this idea that product and marketing, and particularly marcoms, should work in separate silos. I actually think those functions need to be super aligned because what we're building should align with what we're telling the world our vision is and where we're going and all of that. It should all ladder up to the same goal. And so I think most marketers I talk to just want to work more closely with product people and be sort of a trusted member of the team. I think comms people and marketers should work on not being obstructionist also. If you're sort of like, no, no, wait, we can't do this until this, you will get disinvited from the meeting. And so finding a way to say yes and it feels really key.
Yeah, I remember one of the first things that you did when we started working together is I remember, I don't know how long it took you to get there, but one day you just started walking around with these like little note cards that had the personas that we were building for on them and just like faces of people. And I'm like, where the hell did those come from? And that was like one of the first things you did. And before you know it, all of our conversations we were having were tying back to these personas and you were keeping them top of mind for everyone. And we enjoyed inviting you to the product meetings because we knew that you would represent how we would talk about these things we're talking about to those people that you helped us identify.
Yeah, the
So
personas work is so fun to do too, especially in a company like that where it felt like we were figuring out who we were selling to because it wasn't an everybody product. Yeah, that was fun. Those were fun times.
those were fun times. So in closing, one of the things Mark and I were curious about is just what it's been like for you to transition from an operational role into more of a venture role where you're still working with operators all the time and founders. But how's that transition been for you?
I'm a little ADD, Ben, and it's been the best of all worlds because I get to work on a bunch of different portfolio companies and help them, I hope, in really tangible and meaningful ways. But I also have the sense of ownership of the firm brand. And so I split my time between BCV and our portfolio. We have a team of 8 folks who help out both the firm and the portfolio. We put on about 110 events a year. We have a marketers community as well as a founder community and all of that that sits on my team and obviously design, all the conversation about brand. So it keeps me really busy and I'm constantly learning new things. I'm learning about legal tech one week and I'm learning about the mining industry the next week. And I love just the variety of interesting information and people that I get to meet. And honestly, the best part of my job is working with founding teams because it just gives me so much energy, particularly early stage, where the world is a blank piece of paper. And I think bringing in marketing early can hopefully have a meaningful impact on telling a story that's compelling, exciting, and drives all the results that you want, whether that's talent or customers or anything or investors. It's a really fun job. I've really enjoyed it. I would say the only downside to it is there's a lot of cooks in a venture. And so if you're used to working in an org that's very, the typical org, the CEO makes the final decision and everything goes down from there. A partnership business is very different. And so there's a lot of consensus building and coalition building and all of that that's central to making big decisions. And it does sometimes make things take a little bit longer on the firm side. But I think you end up getting to a better result because everyone is a former operator and really smart. So that's the job in a nutshell. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Is it something do you
Yeah.
guys ever think about doing, switching to the venture side, switching teams?
Yeah, it's a good question. That's definitely a trend that we're seeing a lot in the community. I think there's the founder path that we talked in kind of the pre-recording. There's a lot of people that are doing angel investing and eventually I think they want to become venture partners.
That's the way to do
And
it.
yeah, I know. For me, I could see maybe myself doing like a venture studio. I still want to be incubating ideas and I really enjoy like taking an idea and make it into something and just being very involved in the user research, etc. But never say never. What
Well,
about
as
you, Ben?
it grows earlier and earlier, we're seeing more people excited about incubating. And so, I think more of those opportunities will make themselves available to you. People are just super familiar with the power law and wanting to get in there early.
Yeah, I think Mark and I talked about the venture studio stuff for a little bit. I think that there's a tremendous amount of talent, quote unquote, on the sidelines, people in full time roles that are not starting companies, or like Mark mentioned earlier, the barrier to starting companies or the risk of starting companies is so high. And yet at the same time, there is a ton of capital that's ready to be deployed at VC
Yeah.
funds and it's going to go into the right deals. But my sense is a lot of VC funds probably have a big opportunity to incubate companies, given the networks and given the market, their understanding of markets and venture scale dynamics. I think that a lot of VC funds could probably fund teams for 6 months and give them like very clear milestones that they need
Yeah.
to be at in 6 months. If it's not working, they'll kill the team. And if it's working, they'll fund the next round or set it up for a proper fundraise. And I bet there's a bunch of really talented people who would like
We're
to
doing a bit of
be on
that
those
now
teams.
for tech-enabled services businesses in New York, and we've already announced
Nice.
BCB Labs in the Bay Area, which we offer you office space, GPUs, mentorship, a whole bunch of different things in Palo Alto if you're sort of idea stage AI company. We launched Profit Security now, I think, out of stealth from there. Contextual AI came from there, and so really excited about that program led by one of our investors, Rackguard.
Cool. We
That's
would love
amazing.
to link to that in the
Yeah.
episode
Yeah,
notes.
awesome.
Yeah.
I know we're coming to an end. This has been amazing. The way
So
we
much
like to
fun.
finish. Yeah. And the way we like to finish these discussions is with two quick questions. One is, where can people find you? And then two, how can the audience be helpful to you?
Okay, so if you want to email me, it's abraley@baincapital.com or just find me on LinkedIn, Allison Braley. I check my messages there pretty religiously. And you can go back and read my old Succession posts if you want to have a chuckle. But then how can people be helpful to me? If you're starting a company, reach out. Doesn't matter how early it is. I can connect you to the right investor. We're B2B only. If it's consumer, that's trickier. But B2B software is our happy place. And then, yeah, if you know great people who you want to refer to our companies, I'm super close with our talent partner here and would love to make those intros. So if you're looking and you're a product leader and you want to get back into startups, let me know. And I'd love to make those connections.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. This has been so much fun.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Mark. This was a blast.
Thanks, Allison. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with someone who you think would benefit from it as well. We really appreciate it. We'd also love a follow or a rating on Substack, Spotify, or YouTube. That's going to let other people find us. And if you have any topic recommendations for a future episode, please send myself or Mark a DM on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks.